Well, so let me introduce you, if you don't know, to William Ostler. So that's him. He died in 1990, but I'll tell you all about him. So he was Canadian, and he was born on the 12th of July in 1849, did I say, I think, which is the day celebrated William of Orange Day, but his father was a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, and interestingly was invited by Charles Darwin to serve on his historic voyage, but turned it down, and subsequently became a clergyman. And I'll show you, he ended up in Oxford, and his house is in Norham Gardens, and we've got some of the original letters that he wrote, including one that he wrote about his mother from Oxford, where he said, "My mother's birthday is on December 14th, and we're looking forward to going there with great interest back to Canada." And she, when she was 9 in 1815, remembers running across Richmond Park to bring news to her parents. She'd just heard of the success at Waterloo. Right. So here is where he was born, and he's got lots of quotations, and some of them I'll put on the slides. They're at the bottom in blue. But this is Bond Head in Canada, and at school he was proficient in what he described as the greatest of all books, the Bible, and he actually was thinking of becoming a priest too. And he had this book, Religio Medici, which was his favourite book, which was put on his coffin after he died. So he changed his mind to medicine, became a doctor, qualified in 1872, and here's one of his quotes. And he did some postgraduate training. This is McGill University in Canada, but he did some training in Europe and went back there as a professor. And lots of quotes, and talked about this one about medicine. If you study medicine without books, it's like going to sea without a chart. But if you study medicine without patience, it's like not going to sea at all. And that's a nasty picture of smallpox, which fortunately is now extinct. But he saw a lot of patients with smallpox and actually worked in a smallpox hospital, which was amazing, and it was very easy to pick it up. But it was quite extraordinary because he looked after a child in Canada that died, and many years ago, many years later when he was in Oxford, this lady came up to him and said, "Osler is an interesting name. My brother who died in Canada was looked after by a doctor called Osler." He said, "Yes," he said, "that was me, I remember the boy." And this would have been in early 1900s without, not much in the way of phones and certainly not emails, but he telegrammed a friend in Canada and asked him to go to the boy's grave and take a picture of the grave. And then when he got that, he made a detour when he was going down to Devon because he found out that the boy's mother was still alive. And he was the senior physician in Oxford, but he was prepared to just go out of his way to take this picture to the boy's mother down in Devon. That's a nice quote of his, a physician who treats himself as a fool for a patient. So he liked children, he looked after children, he talked to children at the bedside. And he did a lot of his own post-mortems, and these specimens in the old library, the old museum at McGill, a lot of those specimens are ones that he did and he took. So In 1884 he was appointed as professor at Pennsylvania. There was a local person who thought he was going to get the job and was very miffed when this young person from outside was appointed. But they obviously saw the qualities of Osler. It's also very good. The young physician starts his life with 20 drugs and the older one ends one drug for 20 diseases. So he married a widow of a surgeon called, her maiden name was Revere. And I don't know if there are any Americans or anybody who knows American history, but Paul Revere, who was one of Revere's ride. So Paul Revere, who's one of her ancestors, was the person who warns the Americans of the English coming at Lexington. And so that was her ancestor. Now, they had one child who died after a week, and then later on had another son. And then he was headhunted, really, by a chap called Hopkins, Johns Hopkins was a shop owner, grocer, who made his fortune and decided that there were two things that would always be needed in the world. One was education and one was hospitals. So he put his money into Johns Hopkins Hospital and Johns Hopkins University, and there were 4 people who founded it. So that was Welsh, who was a pathologist. There's Osler standing there. Halstead was addicted to drugs actually, but also he was a surgeon who was the first person to introduce gloves into surgery, because his theatre sister, who he subsequently married, had a rash on her hands when she was helping him in theatre, so he made some gloves for his theatre sister. And then this was a gynecologist called Kelly. And actually this painting was done in London by this very famous American painter, John Singer Sargent. But it was actually done in London when he was in Oxford. So he was the first physician at the Johns Hopkins. And I think this is very good too. It's a more important thing about the patient than the disease. And here's a classic theatre. Operating theatres are called theatres because in the old days, of course, you used to have people watching when the operation was done in the middle. So his greatest, he always said his greatest accolade was he took students to the bedside to see the patients. And so here he is inspecting, and then feeling, and then listening, and then thinking. And so he became very prominent in the United States. And then in 1981, he started on this book, which is called The Principles and Practice of Medicine. And that became the standard textbook for the next 50 years. I mean, obviously, he was revising it every 3 years, which was a little bit of a chain around his neck, but after he died, other people took it on. We've got a signed copy down at the library, his house down in Oxford. But it's quite interesting because there's a chap called, there was a clergyman whose name I think was called Lake, who took the book on holiday with a medical dictionary and read it, and he happened to be an advisor for Rockefeller, and he said to Rockefeller, this man has written this classic textbook, we need to put, and it was really the first time that science was introduced into a textbook of medicine. So he persuaded Rockefeller to set up a medical foundation and put money into medicine. So he first visited Oxford in 1894, said, I've lost my heart to Oxford. And here we have Paul Revere's chest, which is actually in the Norham Gardens. And the story of this is that it was left to Grace, his wife, and then it was going to go to their son, who sadly died in the First World War. So it then went to his, the Marshal of the Royal Air Force, who said you can have it back on permanent loan. So I went to pick this up with an American friend who was with me, and he saw it and he sort of almost knelt down and worshipped it. And then he said to me, he said, I suppose you can keep the chest and we'll keep the country. Yeah. Whether they'll want the country after tomorrow. maybe questionable. And this is the letter. So he was made the Regius Professor of Medicine, Regius appointment by the King or the Queen. So it's interesting, we've got a copy. This is the letter from Balfour, and confidential, dictated 5th of August 1940. So it's interesting, this is obviously written by Balfour's secretary, but not typed, but just written out, and then signed by Balfour. So, to propose to the appointment of the vacant chair of medicine to the University of Oxford. And his wife was absolutely delighted. He wasn't absolutely sure, but his wife was worried because he was getting so tired in America. All the senior people in America just wanted to see Osler. So she was delighted when he accepted that. And this is the house that he bought in Norham Gardens, called the Open Arms, because they had so many people coming in and out to visit them. And so this became the house of the Regius Professor of Medicine, because after their son died they left it to Christchurch, and then it's now belongs to Green Templeton College. So Reuters have rented rooms there, and we have a little bit of Osler's library, although most of his library has gone back to McGill University. So this was his son, Revere, named after the ancestor. And this is quite poignant because Harvey Cushing was a very well-known neurosurgeon called Cushing's disease is named after him, and he happened to be fairly close when Revere was mortally wounded, and said, buried him. Great grandson of Paul Revere, American patriot, but buried under the British flag. And I think Osler never quite recovered from that, as one would expect. So this is him standing in the library at Norham Gardens, which is essentially unchanged today, actually. And again, by the mantelpiece. And these are three of the great physicians of their day: Lineker, Harvey, and Sydenham. Harvey was the person who found the circulation of the blood, and these are some of his publications over the years in Montreal, in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, and Oxford. And this is his chair, which is down in Norham Gardens, and a page from his diary. That's 6 months. He died in December 1919. He actually had his operation in the house, and not only that, did he had his post-mortem in 30 Norham Gardens as well. He collected a lot of books. In those days you couldn't just look online, but scoured the bookshops whenever he went to Europe or wherever else he went. And this is wonderful. This is a hidden bookcase in Norham Gardens, where I think he used to sort of hide the books from his wife if he'd sort of spent a lot of money on them. He was also master of the almshouses at that's him. So he died, had a chest infection. Thomas Horder was the most famous, next to Osler was famous physician in London who came up to see him when he was very ill. Yes, he said he wanted to be present at his own post-mortem, as he had a lifelong interest in it. His brain is in a collection in Philadelphia. So, and it's interesting that China are very interested in Osler, very interested in his humanitarian. And a few years ago we set up the Chinese Osler Society. So we've had a long association with a little town there called Chongqing, which used to be the capital at the top of the Yangtze River, population of about 30 million. Here's the Great Wall. You've been there?
We were backpacking through China.
Yeah. And this is interesting, because the first time I went there, they had a picture of Osler up, saying diseases that harm require treatments that harm less, which is very interesting. And this is a person I've been working with for the last 25 years, Zibiao Wang. And this is an extraordinary montage, and it's the beginning of life, because that is a ovum and these are sperm. And that is the fertilization of a human egg. So that's a sort of picture of the start of life. And now they have a very big centre there, and these two people, Rosie's in and Zibiao. But this is all now a big National Ultrasound Engineering Research Centre with making machines and so on. I was actually giving a lecture online to a Chinese group this morning, and I always show this. So despite, I mean, the nice thing is that we know that politics between China and the rest of the world isn't always that good, but the medical side of things is very good. And we've got a very good a relationship with them.
We used to call them the barefoot doctors. When Bob and I were backpacking through there, they said they know exactly what to do, but they don't look as though they do. That's what they want to do.
Yes.
And hang out the X-ray plates in the sun to do it.
So I think this is quite nice to show for high intensity focused ultrasound people who think that it's in the day. I think people are not thinking that anymore, but it's interesting that Chief of General Staff in 1910 thought that the aeroplane was a useless and expensive fad. And this is what I used to do. And this actually is a big operation with the cardiac surgeons, because that's a tumour from the kidney that's gone up into the heart. And I just say that I've skipped laparoscopic and robotic surgery just to non-invasive surgery. And so high intensity focused ultrasound was proposed by people who are aptly called the Fry brothers in the 1940s in America. A huge thing there just to do it. And I always think this is rather nice. That here's, I always say, here's an early paper, the Calculus Affair, where they're using sound as a weapon to break windows and all sorts of things. So we all know, normally with ultrasound you're looking at the image that's coming back to look at things, but even at the focal point of ultrasound you have a tiny, tiny rise in temperature, and if you put the power up 10,000 times, you can actually put it into the body and you can kill the cells. Just like if you've got a magnifying glass and you focus the sun's rays, then you can cause a burn. And this is Gail Tahar, with whom I've been working for the last 25 years. She started her work on high intensity focused ultrasound about 50 years ago when she did her PhD. And she's called the Queen, she's a physicist, called the Queen of HIFU, but we were in Tibet together. And we saw how they boil their kettles, which was a very good illustration of the way in which ultrasounds, similar to what ultrasound can do, just focusing it on one point. So this is what we use. We've got it just next door at the Churchill, a transducer there to actually cause the power, and a diagnostic probe there just to see what you're doing. And you basically get heat, often over 55 degrees centigrade, which for 1 second will, or if it's higher than that, for a fraction of a second it will kill the cells. And you have also this thing called cavitation, which is, if you take the top of the champagne cork, champagne bottle, it's basically gas coming out, bubbles coming out of liquid, and you can use that. And this is an underwater propeller, and that's not rust, but that's caused by this cavitation. You get these little bubbles, which if they just break down, cause immense, in the micro, in very small environments, immense pressure, just like firing a bullet at that. So this is caused by something called cavitation. It was interesting because we had a chief operating officer at the hospital many years ago, and I said to him, have you ever heard of cavitation? He said, yes. He says, I worked for the Ministry of Defence, and it was how we used to track the Soviet submarines, because all the propellers give off a certain cavitation energy and frequency, and different submarines. And you can use that just to break up cells. It just fractures the cells. And it can be something called stable, where the bubbles just rise and fall. So as the pressure increases, it makes the bubble smaller, and as the pressure releases, the bubble gets bigger. But if the bubbles collapse, and that's called unstable cavitation, that's when you get a huge amount of energy released just in a very, very small microenvironment. So this is what it does. So focuses, that's a little bit of Osler. And you get a very sharp division between, these are live cells, these are dead cells, about 6 cells thick. So it just, and this is the middle of a block of ox liver. Every time you fire it, you get one of these tiny little things. So you fire it and then move it, fire it and move it, and this is how you fire it into the body. So you fire it and move it, and basically you're painting out a tumour. Every time you fire it, it's about 70, 80 degrees centigrade, so it immediately kills what you're firing it at. But it's about the size of a grain of rice. And this, so if you look here, so this is underwater, so this is made underwater. And so this is just a plastic. So that's just a plastic sheet on the top of the water.
Okay, yep.
And if you focus it just on the water surface, you get this bubble type effect. Just do that. And just on the water surface, about 10 centimetres above the source. And you can see it coming, that's melting the plastic. If you try to touch that, it would burn your fingers, it's so hot. And that's what it does to a very, very thick sheet of plastic.
Okay, yep.
And this again is what we call a phantom. So this is a block of jelly, gel, thick gel. And here you get this from. And there's no, although the focused ultrasound is coming up through this, you don't get any damage beforehand. It's only at the focal point that you get the damage. So we started in about 2002, and we've got a room in there. We've got this slightly smaller machine which we're just trying to get upgraded at the moment. And this was the first patient who was treated with us in 2002, who had very extensive cancer, but was happy for us to treat a lesion in the liver, which showed how effective it was. I mean, she died subsequently because she had multiple lesions, but she very kindly allowed us to do that, and we, after she died, we just had a look at that lesion and showed that it had worked. And here's James Kennedy, who did this work with me, and some of the early people. So David, while very sadly is no longer with us, but he was very influential. He wasn't a doctor, but he helped us get it all started. And he sadly died about 10 years ago of a brain tumour. Tom Leslie, a bit older now, he's a consultant here. Al Berry is working for UK. I looked a bit younger there. James Kennedy had a bit more hair in those days. Fung Wu is still with us. And Roland Illing, who was our second research fellow, is now in Washington DC working for Amazon in a very senior position. And so James wrote this for cancer, but is now changed direction. He's now the vicar at Chipping Norton Church. So we see quite a lot of James still. So we've done various trials. I'll sort of go through these fairly quickly actually, but just concentrate on the interesting things. So we got it approved for application out of China. We were the first people in the Western Hemisphere to have the Chinese machine, and so this was basically James's PhD work, got it approved. This is uterine fibroids in ladies, so that's got all the blood supply, which is why it's white, and after treatment it's black because there's no blood supply there, and it slowly shrinks down. And then we worked with China, who did about 2,000 cases, and as a result of their work and a little bit of work that we've done over here, we got this approved for the treatment of fibroids in women by NICE. And the problem with kidneys is that the fat gets in the way a bit, and the ribs get in the way. But this was a kidney transplant where the kidney goes down into the groin, and somebody who developed a tumour in the transplant, which we did treat with HIFU, found that because there's no fat around the kidney and no ribs in the way, we had virtually complete ablation. I did go back and take that out afterwards, and there was just a tiny rim of viable tissue left around the outside. So somebody had sacral chordoma, which is something that's locally invasive and very difficult to. This person could not sit down pain-free because of these big masses in the fat side. And after treatment, the blood supply was ablated, and they were able to sit down. And the advantage of this over radiotherapy is that you can actually repeat it if you want, unlike radiotherapy. So this was done with some of the neurosurgeons in retinal. And then Constantine Kousios is doing a lot of preclinical work on focused ultrasound across at the Botner Centre in across the road, orthopaedics. And this person, Paul Lyon, who's now a radiologist here, his PhD was interested. This was targeted drug delivery for liver tumours. So basically you have these things called liposomes, which are a bit like butter. So they are solid at 37 degrees centigrade, but at 42 degrees centigrade they turn into liquid. So you can put a drug in the middle of their cytotoxic drug, and so what they were doing was, so they had people who had a tumour in the liver, took a biopsy of it to prove what it was, and then they put this drug in peripherally into the vein, and then they heated up this with ultrasound to 42 degrees centigrade, just the tumour, and then as the drug goes through the tumour it breaks open and you get an increased delivery of the drug. So I treated that area, and then in this particular thing 2 weeks later there's no uptake, no activity there. And so they had most of the patients had effectiveness to some degree or another from a much increased targeted drug delivery. And that was the first ever done in humans, and that was written up in the Lancet by him. And this is quite interesting. We haven't got this machine in Oxford, but there is one down at St Mary's. So when the Fry brothers first did this, they were treating Parkinson's disease, but you had to make a hole in the skull to get the focused ultrasound in. But nowadays you can do it with lots of different transducers around the skull, and you can treat the tremor of Parkinson's disease and essential tremor very effectively. And if you go onto YouTube and type in brain HIFU, there's some amazing pictures of people who haven't been able to hold a coffee cup for about 15 years, and immediately after treatment can just pick it up and the tremor's gone. And then I had this in China, so Americas as well as Osler. So this philosophy, which again the Chinese people very like that. This is interesting. This is a Chinese edition of his book, The Principle and Practice of Medicine, which we have one copy in Oxford. I wasn't sure whether there are any in China. I asked the librarian there, and he looked it up, and there are 1 or 2 copies of this in China in the medical libraries. It was actually translated in 1910 by the China Medical Missionary Association in Shanghai. But that's the Chinese edition of Osler's book. And this is, my son was renting this house when he was in Bradford as a vet in the Cotswolds. Here's James Kennedy and his wife. We were giving, we invited a Chinese group over to the house. So this person was Professor Zhang, who was the president of the Chinese Medical Association. He was responsible for 3 million doctors in China. This is Professor Lang, who is the senior gynecologist in China, responsible for about 200,000 gynecologists in China. This is James's daughter showing Professor Zhang how to eat scones and cream, either the Cornish way or the Devon way. And this was when we inaugurated the Chinese Osler Society, which nothing much happened during COVID, but I think they're just re-evaluating that. And here we are down in Osler's house. And this guy, Professor Lang, was a very good artist, and he wrote this out. And they are sitting in his Osler's chair. And so he did this in Chinese script. So practicing medicine is a kind of art based on science, profession rather than exchange. So this is sort of similar to Osler's philosophy. Those are some Chinese stamps with the HIFU units on. And I always think that this is a very famous Chinese book. Very famous quote in there is, "Keep your friends close and your enemies closer." But I think it's the traits of a doctor as well. And this is a pavilion that Gail and I paid a little bit of money to build in Chengcheng. And that's interesting. That's 100 years before COVID. Osler said that. So there we go. And that's it. Lots of people involved over the years. But it's good to see that it's got a momentum of its own now, so which is fantastic, which I wasn't sure whether it was going to have about 20 years ago.
Thank you, David. Any questions? You mentioned kidney then, about the fat and stuff like
Yes.
that. Are there any developments that are potentially going to make that a little bit more relevant?
Yeah, we're hoping to get another trial going with kidney. I mean, the other thing that I didn't say is that how much the immunology, there's not a lot of work being done so far. We actually, the other thing I didn't show is that we've got a trial going with pancreas cancer at the moment, actually. But also looking at the immunology. So the idea is, if you're treating this, might you have an immunological effect as well? So might you have, if you break up some of the cancer cells, might you get antibodies against the cancer cells, and might that help to continue to destroy the cancer? And one day, if you could show that that did work, then you might find that you treat the primary cancer and the secondaries disappear. Or if you can't get to the primary, you treat the secondaries and the primary shrinks down. So very little work being done on that so far, but it's an area of great interest to see whether that is true and happening. So, and there are potentially other ways of treating kidneys, and I think just as the clever physicists know how to get through the intact skull now to treat into the brain, I think if you have maybe more than one source of the ultrasound, it would be easier to get through the fat to the kidney. So I think the physicists are working on how to do things like that.
I mean, when we think of treatments, we think of surgery, we think of radiotherapy, we think of drugs. No one ever mentions HIFU. I mean, no. Should frogs be asking for it?
Well, the thing is, and sadly for kidneys, it's not an established yet. So uterine fibroids, yes. Prostate cancer now, increasingly. But all the others is in trials, and
what about for metastases?
There may be some trials coming on with kidneys in the future. It's fairly soon. We want to do another trial with kidneys.
But for metastases, then, is it something that could be?
Well, it'd be in trials at the moment. It depends where the metastases are, because if you take liver, for example, there are other. Part of the problem is that it is fairly slow still, although that will speed up. But there are various other things for the liver that, so radio frequency ablation and microwave ablation and so on. So we wanted to set up, and we're talking about the possibility of setting up another study looking at liver, and it depends where in the liver it is. But potentially it could be done for liver, but it's not NICE approved at the moment, so it will just be done in trials at the moment, but it's something that we are wanting to get another kidney trial going.
It's incredible, isn't it? It just seems like something out of science fiction.
Yeah, I know.
What does it feel like for the person who's having it?
Well, for fibroids, you're doing it under sedation.
Right.
And for prostate cancer at the moment it's done under general. But if you take, so uterine fibroids is where it's being used the most. I mean, they've treated several 100,000 people in the Far East with it, and we are treating people with it. We're just trying to get, and it is NICE approved, we're trying to get a contract for treating people. So hysterectomy obviously removes the uterus, so you can't, you can't have children afterwards. Myomectomy just removes the fibroid. There's something called uterine artery embolization where you block off the artery, and that's quite interesting because, I mean, that does work, but you're blocking off the artery but not the vein, so they often get quite a toxic reaction with some of the dead tissue sort of coming out in circulation, whereas they don't seem to have that with HIFU, because HIFU ablates the tiny veins as well as the arteries, so they get very little side effects and very few complications, and you can repeat it if you want, and lots of people have had babies after HIFU for fibroids. So I think it's a brilliant treatment for fibroids. And I didn't show on here, but if you go onto the website, we were made last year a Centre of Excellence by, there's a big organisation called the Focussed Ultrasound Foundation in the United States, that a retired neurosurgeon set up, and they have got a website which is available to anybody to look at it, Focussed Ultrasound Foundation, and they have a list of all the treatments. They have ones that are approved and remunerated, that people get money for. They have the ones that are in trials. They have ones that are pre-clinical trials. But there are about 100 different applications on their website of potential trials and potential treatments, all sorts of things, cancers. It's an interesting website. It's called the Focussed Ultrasound Foundation in the United States. And John, it's based in, I was over there in January, based in Virginia, and it's actually where John Grisham lives. And John Grisham, the author, has been very involved in it. He's written a little booklet about it, and he often pops into the headquarters there, so he's been a great advocate for it.
Just thinking economics and funding, cost of ultrasound compared with other treatments?
Yeah, well, I mean, fortunately, well, this machine, if China is selling it, probably sell it for 2 million. Fortunately, they give it to us. Even so, we're just they're giving us an upgrade, but it's just being incredible. Even though it's all paper, it's still incredibly difficult to get it into the hospital. But the actual treatment, once you've got it there, the running costs are pretty minimal in terms. I mean, we would pay. China wants a service charge of about 60,000 a year for it, just to get it up and running. But you pay for water, you pay for electricity, and the machine itself is lasts for. Well, we've had our machine for 12 years. They wanted to replace it after 10 years, but we just had problems actually negotiating the upgrade, not with China, who've been wanting to give it to us, but with the trust, who seem to be just very slow in going through all the protocols to get it done. So it's, the actual, once you've got the machine and so on, there's the anaesthetic charges, there's the various subsidiary things, nursing and everything, but you're not using expensive drugs or anything like that.
And do you have many staff who are trained to use it? Presumably it's quite...
Yes, well, the person that's from China has been doing it and training up the radiologist, Paul Lyon, and there's another gynecological radiologist who's learning how to do it. So, it's basically sort of sitting at a computer, just sort of targeting it, and what you need an MRI scan, but you get, for the fibroids anyway, you have an MRI scan, but then you're looking at it on the basis of diagnostic ultrasound, just to see where it is, and the one thing that you have to be careful of is that you don't treat through bowel, because unlike magnifying glass with the sun's rays which comes through the air, the ultrasound is generated underwater, and the body is basically like fluid, except for the bowel. So if you have bowel in the way, you potentially would make a hole in the bowel, which is why you've got to make sure the bowel is out wide. But amazingly, you can still get to the pancreas quite successfully. Get the bowel out wide.
Fascinating.
Very
So watch this
amazing.
space.
Scientific.
Yeah.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah, the other thing, actually, I didn't show that here. I saw an article in the one of the I think it was Scientific American or something, when they were with rats last year. They were with focused ultrasound. They were targeting, I don't know which area of the brain it was, but putting them into a hibernation state. So the question is, could you do that in the future with humans?
Wow.
If you wanted to send them off to Mars or something.
Wow, that's incredible. Again, more science fiction. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed.
Good.
That was fascinating. With a little history lesson and then what the future's bringing as well, which...
It's good to know why the Osler Road is called the Osler Road now. So,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
just drove up there to park. That's it, you're on the Osler Road.
His, well,
So do they do tours of the house then?
I can do a tour of the
Ah.
house if you want.
A bit of a frog outing.
Yeah, for coffee as well.
13 Northern Gardens.
Yes, not my 490.
Yeah.